Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to thank the Apologetics Group for inviting me and for you coming out this evening. It's really wonderful to be with this wonderful church and to have this opportunity to be together. A few years ago, I was in the Seattle airport. I had spoken in a church that weekend. I was flying back, and I picked up a copy of the Seattle Times and made a beeline for the editorial page. And there on the front page of the Seattle Times editorial section, covered two-thirds of the front page and about half of the second page, was a syndicated column that went to several newspapers around the country that day entitled A Divided Nation. And the author went on to say that we now live in the most divided period in the history of the United States. And I actually think he's right about that. What was truly shocking to me, however, was what he said was the fundamental thing that divides Americans. He said it's not politics. It's interesting, because there are deep, deep political divisions among the American people. Deep. And they grow deeper as time goes on. It's not political. It's not racial. There are racial divisions in this country. There's no doubt about that. It is not socioeconomic. And it's not gender. The fundamental division on the part of the American people, said this editorial, is a division about worldview. Worldview. Now, a worldview is the fundamental thing you believe about truth and reality and value. It is your overall perspective about the world. Christianity is a worldview. Buddhism is a worldview. Atheism is a worldview. Marxism was a worldview. And what this author is claiming is that now we live in a culture where there is a shocking, deep, fundamental division of worldview, and this division is generating the other divisions among the American people to some degree. Now, you have to understand, I think he said that there were two fundamental sides in that debate. He was wrong about that. There are actually three. And I'll tell you what they are in a little bit, and I'll explain to you what the main thing it is that they disagree about, because there's one fundamental thing that these three worldviews don't agree about. I'll tell you about that in just a second. But I want to make the point that, given that there's a worldview struggle going on in American culture, we now live in the first time in the history of the church for 2,000 years, so far as I can tell, where Christianity is not only considered to be irrational, it is for the first time in Western culture now considered not only to be irrational, it is also considered to be immoral. Thus, if you believe in the Christian God, you believe in Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy, you're probably dumb and stupid. As one columnist put it in the Washington Times, evangelical Christians are dumb, stupid, and easy to lead, was his view. But not only are you likely to be dumb and stupid if you follow Jesus, I'll cheer up here in just a little bit. You're also an intolerant bigot, because it is Christianity that tries to impose its values on other people. It's Christianity that says homosexuality is not right, that sex outside of marriage is wrong, such and thus and so. So it's the Christian religion and its practitioners that are ignorant, and they're not only ignorant, they're immoral bigots. So recently, Jane Smiley, a novelist, made the following statement about us, those of us who are followers of the Lord Jesus. Quote, "Here is how their ignorant bigotry works. First, they put the fear of God in you. If you don't believe in the literal word of the Bible, you'll burn in hell. Of course, the literal word of the Bible is tremendously contradictory, and so you have to abdicate all critical thinking and accept a simple but logical a system of belief that's dangerous to question." So we're not going to have a Q&A time later on this evening. We'll just set that aside. A corollary to this point is that that is we, make sure that you understand the devil resides in the toils and snares of complex thought, and so it's best not to try to think at all. So do you understand now that the idea that is afoot around American culture, being propagated largely by the universities and the media and the public schools, is that the Christian religion is largely an irrational worldview for people who are real needy. It can't withstand scrutiny and critical thought, and that Christians are anti-intellectuals. Now, this is not a very cheery thing. And when we go out to try to win people to Jesus Christ and we try to grow in the Lord, we have to understand that this is the culture in which we now live and move and have our being. Now, we should have expected this, because I want to show you two texts. I'll look at one of them and I'll reference the other one. But I want to refer to a very important text in 2 Corinthians chapter 10. If you have a copy of the New Testament, if you would turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 10. I am convinced that demons are real. I've actually encountered them. I've had opportunities to exorcise demons out of people. And I've seen people physically healed through demonic deliverance with my own eyes. So there's no doubt in my mind that what the Bible teaches about the demonic is true. And we typically think of spiritual warfare as we would read about in, for example, Ephesians 6, as speaking against the demon or against the devil, binding him, and delivering someone from demonic attachment or oppression. And that is legitimate, as I suggested. I've done that before. But there is a second most important text in the New Testament, besides Ephesians 6, on spiritual warfare. And it is grossly neglected. And it's the one we're going to look at right now in 2 Corinthians 10, 3 through 5. Verse 3, for though we walk in the flesh, we don't war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh. That is to say, we're not going to take up arms and fight for our local church. We won't engage in a militia activity on Saturday mornings as a church. You can fight on behalf of the state. Christians being in the military is fine, but not on behalf of the church. Okay, but the weapons of our warfare are divinely powerful for the destruction of what? Now, my translation says fortresses. Now, when you pray against a demon, you're addressing the demonic presence itself. Here, spiritual warfare does not target a demon. It targets something else. It targets a fortress. Now, what exactly is a fortress? Here's what a fortress is. It is an idea or a theory. Darwin's theory of evolution would be an example of a fortress. The idea that all morality is relative would be a fortress. The claim that homosexuality is caused by your genes and your DNA, and thus you are not responsible for homosexual behavior, is a fortress. The idea that the Bible is filled with unverifiable myths, and history and archaeology has repeatedly shown it's false, is a fortress. The idea that the fundamental purpose, that capitalism is immoral, is a fortress. These are all fortresses. Now look at the next verse and I'll demonstrate this to you. It says in verse 5, we are destroying speculations. One translation actually says theories. We are destroying speculations and every lofty thought raised up against, note, not the power of God, but the knowledge of God. The devil can't do anything about the power of God, but what the devil can do something about is blocking people's knowledge of God. And so what we learn from this, ladies and gentlemen, is a very simple point, and I'll ask you this question. How do people control other people? Here's a good way to control a group of people. If you can control how they think and feel, you can control them. And one way to control people is to control the ideas that come into their minds and the ideas they're willing to embrace. Now, demons are people. They're not humans. They're demonic persons. We're human persons. They're demonic persons, angelic persons. They traffic in the world of ideas. Do you understand it follows that one of the main places where spiritual warfare will occur will be in the pages of Time and Newsweek magazine, the New York Times, Borders bookstore, your children's school, UC Irvine, anything that traffics in the world of ideas will be a battleground for the hearts and minds of people from spiritual warfare. The world of ideas is not neutral. It is a place where there is a war going on for the souls and minds of men and women in this culture every single day. And when I step up to the lectern every day at the university at which I teach, I know I'm doing battle for the kingdom of God against dark forces that are on the other side of the things that the Bible teaches. And this is happening from kindergarten to 12th grade in the public schools and in Christian schools even, and all throughout our culture. Now, don't turn to Romans 12:2, but Romans 12:2 says, you recall, don't be conformed to the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Why the renewing of your mind in the context of of not being conformed to the world? The answer is because just as the demonic forces try to influence the ideas that are in our minds, so does the world. The world spins out ideas that are in contradiction, not all the time, but sometimes in contradiction to biblical and Christian teaching. This means that we have to become people who know not only what we believe, but why we believe it. And how do you fight against an idea? There's really one primary way that you fight against an idea, and it's through argumentation. It's through argumentation. I was talking to Lenny earlier, and he said the reason that we're losing the marriage and the gay issue is because the Christian community has not articulated a powerful argument on behalf of this issue, and we haven't. We have not articulated an argument on behalf of a certain ethical position. And it is because the Christian community has lost the ability to argue that we are losing the war in spiritual warfare to a significant degree in American culture. There was a time when it was a typical thing in church for people to be taught logic and reason and so on, but that is vastly not happening today. And so what I'm trying to suggest to you is that we shouldn't be surprised that we are getting an attack from worldviews, because this would be predicted from 2 Corinthians 10, and it would be predicted from Romans 12:2, because we're involved in a conflict of ideas. And you fight spiritual warfare from that perspective by learning to critique and argue against alternative views and to defend and contend for your own positions. Now, I suggested there were three worldviews that are currently fighting for the hearts and minds of people in our culture. Let me tell you what those are. One of them is historic Christianity, and I'm happy to say that conservative Catholics and conservative Protestants are growing in numbers and in influence in important places. And so the historic Christian faith is growing, and there are good things happening, and Christianity is one of the three worldviews. The second worldview, which is by far the most dominant worldview in Western culture, is the worldview of scientific naturalism. Scientific naturalism. Scientific naturalism is basically the idea that the only way to know reality is through the hard sciences, chemistry and physics. If you can't prove something scientifically, you can't know it. Okay? So just think of the difference that the doctor and the pastor have with respect to authority in American culture. The doctor has incredible authority. Doctors are interviewed on CNN, Dateline NBC, and so on. Pastors aren't. Why? Because doctors know something and pastors don't. Doctors have knowledge because they're involved in the field of science, medical science. And in science, you can know right and wrong. But when it comes to fields outside science, like ethics or politics or religious claims, these can't be tested scientifically, so nobody can know who's right. You out there? Okay, so therefore, if you can't know whether you're right or somebody else is right, it becomes intolerant for you to legislate your views on other people. That's why if somebody stood up here in this room and said, don't drink that, that's hydrochloric acid, nobody would accuse them of legislating chemistry. Okay? But we do accuse people of legislating religion and ethics because the assumption is those are fields in which no one can really know anything who's right or wrong there. And so it becomes intolerant legislation in those areas, but not in physics and chemistry. So the scientific naturalist says the only way to know reality is through the methods of the hard sciences. Now, I was at a dinner party years ago where I was going to share the gospel with a group of people, and I was told that one PhD physicist from Johns Hopkins University was going to come to the meeting and that he really hated Christianity and religion and that he'd be there. And so I was at the hors d'oeuvre table, and he came up to me, and I could tell who it was. He walked in, and he was introduced to me, and after we exchanged pleasantries, he said, well, I understand you're a philosopher and a theologian. And I said, well, I give it my best shot. And he said, yeah, I used to be interested in that kind of stuff too when I was a teenager. But I outgrew it when I became a mature adult because I realized that if you can't test something and quantify it and prove it in a laboratory, it's nothing but a bunch of hot air. And that's the attitude I'm talking about. Now, my purpose this evening is not to critique these ideas. I'm trying to alert you to a problem. If you want to see a critique, the book I brought out front, The Kingdom Triangle, contains a critique of this worldview. But I can't resist giving you one thing to say. The claim that you can only know reality through the hard sciences is self-refuting. Something is self-refuting if it makes itself false. Consider the sentence, no sentence in English is longer than 3 words. That's self-refuting because the sentence itself is longer than 3 words. For me to say there are no truths or I can't speak a word of English would be self-refuting statements. The statement, you can only know things through the hard sciences, cannot itself be known through the hard sciences. There's no way to test it or prove it in physics or chemistry lab, and so the statement is self-refuting. So I said to this gentleman after I let him go for 2 or 3 minutes, I said, you know, sir, I've got a problem with what you're saying. Maybe you could help me. Yeah, sure. And I said, you've been talking 2 or 3 minutes. You've made 40 or 50 claims so far. And I can't think of a single statement that's come out of your mouth so far that anybody could test and prove in the scientific lab. And I said, if there is one, would you tell me which one it was? And if there wasn't, then it seems to imply by your standards, sir, that what you've been doing for the last 2 to 3 minutes is spewing hot air. And it was true. It was true. So he changed the subject and then went off into other things he didn't know anything about. It was terrible. That really happened. All right. Now, the second worldview, the third worldview, is postmodern relativism. Postmodern relativism. Whereas scientific naturalism is taught largely in the media, postmodern relativism, which I'll define for you in a second, is taught largely through pop culture, music, movies, the entertainment industry, and in the universities, in the humanities departments, especially literature, communications, and sociology. These have been heavily, and sometimes history departments are influenced by postmodern thought. So if you have a child that's going to college and they're going to be a communication or a literature major, hold on to your hat. They're going to get a steady dose of postmodern relativism. What is this? It's basically the claim that there is no objective truth or reality, that all truth and reality is relative to your community. What's real or true for one community is not real or true for another community, and no one's wrong. No one's wrong. And no one's really right either. So does God exist? You bet to Christians. But God doesn't exist to atheists, and they're both right. So there is no such thing as an objective real world. Now, can you understand that in that context of postmodern relativism, the claim that Jesus Christ is the only way to God is not going to be greeted warmly. And this will be an area where we in the evangelical church are going to be called to compromise biblical teaching in the next 15 years. And we need to stay true on this. We don't need to be angry about it. We just need to be firm on this. But let me just illustrate this. I was flying in an airplane to North Carolina not long ago, and the movie that was being shown was called A Stolen Summer. And it was about two little boys that went home for the summer in the Chicago area. One boy was about 14, the other was, I'd say, maybe 11 years old. They were having a lot of fun, but the 14-year-old was a Catholic Christian, and his little 11-year-old friend was Jewish, and the 14-year-old was worried that his little Jewish friend wasn't saved. And so the struggle of the movie was that he kept trying to get his little buddy saved. So he took him, he got him on his knees in his garage, had him say a prayer in Jesus' name. He took him to his priest at the church. He did 3 or 4 or 5 things to try to get his little Jewish friend to come to Jesus. Well, toward the end of the summer, an accident happened and the little Jewish boy was killed. The closing scene of the movie is at the boy's funeral. The parents are walking out of the funeral area, and they run into the 14-year-old Catholic boy. And the Catholic boy says to the mom and dad, "I want to apologize for my attitude this summer, because I now know that when it comes to God, it doesn't matter what you believe. What really matters is whether or not you love people." Now that sounds good, but it's nonsense. But that is postmodern relativism. And you tell that story with good music surrounding you, and pretty soon you start thinking, yeah, that's right. What's wrong with those Christians? Well, that's basically what's going on. Now, so let me back up. We're involved in a spiritual war with unseen powers and with the world, and this war focuses in the world of ideas. It is a worldview contest. As a result of this, we Christians need to know not only what we believe, but why we believe it. And the 3 worldviews are scientific naturalism, postmodern relativism, and Christian theism, Christianity. Now, there's one thing that naturalism and postmodernism agree about. And this is going to take me a second to unpack this, but this is the fundamental tension point with the Christian community and the secular culture. And it's not going to be one that you've thought of, but it is at the rock bottom. And it's over the question of the nature and limits of knowledge. The fundamental question at the beginning of the 21st century is over the nature and the limits of knowledge. Now let me explain. Postmodernism and naturalism agree that that the nature of knowledge is empirical science. And therefore the limits of knowledge are the hard sciences. They agree about that. You cannot, I repeat, you cannot know anything outside the fields of medicine, chemistry, physics, neuroscience, and so on. You understand that? And so as a result of this, the claim is not just that Christianity isn't true. There are some people who are willing to admit that it may well be the case that Christianity is true. But what is universally acknowledged is that even if Christianity is true, you can't know it's true. You have to accept it by a personal act of feeling or a blind act of faith or some burning in the heart or something of that sort. There's no objective way to know the Christian religion or God or moral statements are true. And so what we're fighting about today is not only are we asserting that we take Christianity to be true, but that we also think it's something that people can come to know to be true. Now, you have to understand, my dear brothers and sisters and friends, that the institutions of the church for 2,000 years, up until around 1950, have always taken the central teachings of the Bible and the great creeds of the church to give us not just truth, but knowledge of reality. Knowledge of reality. That these were things that you could actually know to be real and know to be true. But that is no longer believed, and instead the Christian community has retreated to faith. And we have replaced knowledge with faith. Now, faith is a wonderful thing. But if you want a good definition of faith, faith is trusting what you know to be the case. Faith is actually based on knowledge. It is not a substitute for knowledge. It is actually based on knowledge. Now, I believe that Christianity is a source not only of truth, but of knowledge of reality. And I want to spend a little bit of time in the remaining time I have in explaining what that means. So let me make the claim again. The claim is that the central teachings of the Christian religion provide knowledge of its subject matter. Just like math and chemistry and American history provides knowledge of certain things about George Washington, so the Christian religion presents knowledge of things like what is prayer and how does it work, what is the nature of forgiveness, what is love. You don't want to go, I want to know what love is. You don't want to go there. That is not going to give you the answer to the question. 1 Corinthians 13 is bedrock. Hello? Yeah. That's a lot better answer. Ask which parent kind of a parent would you like to have? Somebody who sang the song and lived it out, or somebody who lived out 1 Corinthians 13? Okay. And so the basic idea here is that Christianity presents us with stuff that can be known and not simply has to be believed. So now that raises the question, what is knowledge? What is knowledge? And what I'm going to do now is to explain briefly what knowledge is, and I'll say a little bit about how Christianity gives it to us. Okay? There are three kinds of knowledge. There are three kinds of knowledge. The first is knowledge by experience. It's knowledge by experience. This is where you know something by directly experiencing it. So, for example, I know that there are people in this room because I can directly see you. I know that there are sounds going on in the room because I'm aware of them. Knowledge by experience is when you become directly aware of something and you encounter it itself. I know the podium is here because I can see it. Now, knowledge by experience goes beyond the five senses. Okay, let me give you an example. Your knowledge of your own conscious life is knowledge by direct experience, but it does not involve your five senses. So if I were to ask you, what are you thinking right now? You could easily tell me what you were thinking. I could ask you, what color is this? How does this piece of paper appear to you? What color did this appear to you? And thank you very much. We're supposed to answer the question. You're supposed to, all right. Okay, so you know how it appears to you, okay? You know by turning inward whether you're feeling a pain in your leg or whether you're feeling hungry or whatever it might be. Consciousness is not something you can see, touch, taste, smell, or hear, but you can know it by direct experience. Now, Christianity provides knowledge by experience with God in the unseen world. I have had knowledge by experience with demons before, when I have been aware of their presence. One illustration of this, I was at a gymnasium where I was at the half-court line. There were probably 2,500 people in this gymnasium. I felt a demonic presence come in the gymnasium. I looked over at the door and saw 3 young men walk in. And there was an aura as I observed them of the demonic, and I felt it before I looked at them. I noted where they sat down, and after the meeting was over, I went to talk to them, and all 3 of them were deeply involved in occult practices and were there that evening to provide disruption for the meeting in some way or another. I sensed the presence of darkness in those young men. Many of you in this room have had encounters with angels or demons and have directly experienced these beings. There are times when we have a direct experience of God, too. where God shows up and you experience him in worship, or while in prayer, or at the oddest times, or when God speaks to you and you learn to discern his voice and hear his presence. I wish I had time to talk about that. The point I'm making is that there is a form of genuine knowledge that philosophers recognize, called knowledge by experience, that Christianity provides us. We can actually directly experience God's presence, especially vividly at certain times in our lives. So that is the first form of knowledge that we have in the Christian religion. It's knowledge by direct experience. The second form of knowledge is called propositional knowledge. Propositional knowledge. Now, what is propositional knowledge? I'll define it for you, and then I'll illustrate it and explain it. It is a true belief based on adequate reasons. A propositional knowledge is a true belief based on adequate reasons. Okay? Now, before I can clarify that, I need to define truth for you. I'm going to give you a little sentence definition of truth. Okay, you ready? Truth is a matching between thought and reality. That's it. Truth is a matching between thought and reality. If I have the thought that 2 and 2 is 4, and that's reality, then my thought is. And why is my thought true? Because it matches reality. I go to the bookstore, and I've been told there's a certain book that I ordered that's available for me. I see the book, and I think, what was my thought? My thought was that the book is in the bookstore. There's the book in the bookstore. Guess what? Hello, they match. And then I say to myself, I want a word for that matching thing. Fred, no. I'm going to use the word truth. So I come home and my wife says, you're angry. I'm not angry. Oh, yes, you are. No, I'm not angry. Okay, so instead of going to the bookstore, I introspect. And what do I take with me? The thought that I'm angry. I go inward, and what do I do but encounter this seething anger in my stomach? And I compare my thought with what's going on in me, and I go, there's that thing again. That matching deal. What did I call that? Truth. Falsehood is when a thought or a belief fails to match reality. When we claim the Bible is true, we mean that its teachings, when properly interpreted, match reality. It's that simple. You comfortable with that at this point? I don't know what you do if you weren't. I mean, too big a group to... You can ask a question about it later if you like. All right, now, what is knowledge?
I don't blame you for living this wish had been enough for you to stay. I saw it coming in the way you changed, in the silence between your words. Every I'm fine felt heavier than truth, like something breaking unheard. I tried to fix what I didn't understand, held on tighter as you slipped away. But love can't grow where it's already gone.
Propositional knowledge. That is when you have a belief that matches reality, that you hold for adequate reasons. You have a belief that matches reality that you hold for adequate reasons. Illustration. Suppose that I were down at Newport Beach and I ran across a fellow that was drunk 24/7. All he did was drink all day and all evening. And he had formed the habit of believing everything written on the stall, the second stall of the men's room at the public restroom at Newport Beach. His attitude was, the stall says it, I believe it, that settles it. And so he goes in there one day, and written on the second stall of the men's room is the claim George Washington was the first president of the United States. Frankly, he's never heard of George Washington. He's heard of the presidency, but he has no clue who George Washington was. But dadgummit, the stall says it, and he believes it. Now compare him with a historian who's got documents from that period, court records, newspaper articles, and so on. Our historian and our Newport Beach friend have two things in common, don't they? They have the same belief, right? And their beliefs are true. That means they match reality. But one of them has knowledge of the truth and the other doesn't. Why? Because the Newport Beach gentleman doesn't have any basis for his beliefs. He's lucky. The historian has a foundation or a basis for his belief. Are you with me? So when you know something, not only do you have truth about it, you have a true belief about it, but you also have a good basis for what you believe. So you can possess truth without knowledge. Say that you believe the truth but have no idea why you believe it. Knowledge, however, requires the belief be true, but that there be reasons for it. By the way, this is one of the reasons why when we teach our children what to believe, we impart truth to them. But when we teach them why they believe it, we give them knowledge. That's the important point about this. Now, very, very important. Notice that I said that propositional knowledge is true belief based on adequate reasons, not conclusive reasons. Now, why is that important? This is very important. You can know something without being certain you're right. You can know something without being certain that you're right. You don't have to have a true belief based upon completely 100% foolproof reasons to know something. If that were the case, about all I would know was that I existed. I wouldn't even know there was an external material world because I don't have conclusive reasons for that. I've got pretty good reasons for it. So the point is that you can have doubts about things. For example, you could have doubts about God's existence. You could have questions about God's existence that you don't have answers to, and none of that means that you don't know there's a God. You can know there's a God if you have a true belief about God based upon adequate reasons. Now you say, well, what are the adequate reasons? And I can't answer that in general. We have to look at each issue as it comes up. But it would be things like the creation of the universe, the design in the universe, the existence of a moral law that requires a moral lawgiver, the historical evidence that the New Testament documents are historically reliable, the historical case for the reliability of Jesus, and things like that. Okay. So the second kind of knowledge we have is propositional knowledge. The third kind of knowledge, and then I'll illustrate this and summarize what I've said, and we'll close, then go to Q&A, but is know-how or skill. This is know-how or skill. This is the ability to do something well. Know-how or skill is the ability to do something well. And the Bible is filled with, we might call it wisdom, know-how, skill. If you want to learn how to live life well, pay heed to the teachings of the Scriptures. If you want to learn how to pray and get your prayers answered, learn how to pray according to the teachings of the Old and New Testaments, and so on. The point that I'm making is that the Bible and Christianity provides savvy or know-how for life. Know-how for life. And by the way, this is absent in our universities. There's almost no wisdom or skill for living that is being taught in the universities any longer. It's being taught in the church, thank God, but very, very few places do you get this any longer. Can't get it at a sports bar. It's pretty, you can say, well, how do you know that? Well, that's not. Lenny told me. Okay, so now let me summarize what I'm trying to say with all my heart. We're involved in a spiritual war between unseen powers and the world. That warfare involves ideas. The competition is among three worldviews: scientific naturalism, postmodern relativism, and Christianity. The other two don't agree about everything, but they do agree that there's no such thing as knowledge of reality outside the hard sciences. Christianity claims, in contrast, that there is knowledge of reality outside of science. Thank God for science, but there are other ways of knowing things, and you can know God is real and know right from wrong and things of that sort. You don't just have to close your eyes and squint and believe it. Now, when I claim that Christianity provides knowledge, what do I mean? First of all, it gives us knowledge by experience with God and other beings. Secondly, we have propositional knowledge. That means that its teachings give us true beliefs based on good reasons, not completely 100% certifying, but adequate reasons to know. And I can know something and still doubt it and have questions about it. The third kind of knowledge that Scripture gives us is skill or wisdom or know-how, the ability to live life well. This is what I mean when I claim Christianity provides knowledge of reality, and it's important that we recover our heritage in this area and use this as our self-talk. I want to challenge you to talk less about faith and more about knowledge. Let's pray. Father, thank you for this evening, and for those who've come, I pray that you'd continue to be with us as we labor over these concepts and have a time to talk here coming up. Thank you so much for my friends here this evening. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you. Am I sitting here?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, you are.
Well, I want to thank you again for inviting me, especially the Come Reason Ministry. I have known Lenny for so long and have such regard for this ministry, and I'm so proud to be a part of it. So I'm just grateful. Thank you.
Well,
thank you.
I'm sure, Dr. Moreland, I can speak on everyone's behalf that we're blessed to have you here, and we're blessed to have someone of your caliber in the Christian sphere thinking and teaching others how to think for the glory of God. So we appreciate your ministry. Well, with no further, yeah, you can clap. Just a reminder, if you still want to text your questions in, it's not too late. You can text them to 951-398-1197. Again, that's 398-1197, 951 area code. All right, are you ready? Okay. Well, here's our first question. The first question is, how can understanding the attributes of God, Dr. Moreland, such as his immutability, omniscience, help us love him with all of our minds?
Well, if you're going to love anything, you have to know something about it. The more I've learned about my wife, the more I love her because I know who she is. If you're going to love chemistry, that can grow as you learn more about it and gain facility with it. So typically, the more you learn about the attributes of something, the more you can draw yourself into loving it. The same's true with God. Except in his case, whereas the attributes of an electron are relatively mundane, it has a certain rest, mass, and charge. I suppose that's reasonably interesting. But the attributes of God are not only things that draw us in, but they're spectacular. Take immutability, the fact that he doesn't change. Imagine what God would be like if he did. That would be a nightmare. I mean, we could have a sense for what he thought now, but what about 2 years from now? I mean, everything would be up for grabs. So one way to appreciate the study of the attributes of God is to come to terms with what it would be like if God didn't have this characteristic. And boy, that just makes them very, very dear.
Excellent answer. You had me until you said electrons.
Yeah.
Our next question from the audience is, what should I say to someone who doesn't think hell is a literal place?
Well, we have to draw a distinction between hell being a literal place and hell being real. Everything that's real is not necessarily a location. Hell is a form of existence right now, and it eventually will be a place, but it's not a location right now. When people die, they go to a different kind of reality altogether. And if someone wanted to say, well, why should I believe in hell? The answer is because God is too wonderful to force people to have to be around him if they don't want to. I mean, have you ever been around somebody that was really, really, really smart and good looking and funny and drew a lot of attention and everybody liked to be around them and you hated them, didn't like them? That's that's uncomfortable. That would be what heaven would be like for people who don't love God, because God's really smart and he's got a sense of humor. He loves his life. He is full of all kinds of good things. And if you didn't want to be around him, that would be a rough deal. And hell is a way of allowing people who don't want to be around God and have anything to do with his kingdom to avoid having to be there. And it will be isolation, and it will not be pleasant. So I would basically say that the reason that there's a hell is because God gave people free will, and he's not going to force them to have to be around him if they don't want to be. Now, I think Jesus knew a lot more about this topic than most of us. And so when it comes to some 18-year-old I'm talking to on the street about Jesus or about hell in Jesus' opinion, I'm strongly inclined to go with Jesus as opposed to an 18-year-old downtown in the mall. I mean, it seems reasonable to me.
Good call.
Yeah.
On that same note, Dr. Moreland, it seems like, talking about worldviews, it seems like the worldview today in secular society is the idea that if there is this all-loving, all-powerful God, then he couldn't judge someone and send them to a place like hell. Why do you think it is so hard for people today to imagine that a loving God could send someone, to judge someone and send them to hell?
The reason people are against being intolerant and judging people is due to narcissism or self-centeredness. It really comes down to them not wanting people to judge them. So the price they're willing to pay for not judging others, which they do all the time, is to say, I won't be judgmental because I don't want you to judge me. Now, why do I not want you to judge me? Because I know deep in my heart I'm not living a very good life and I don't know what I believe. I can't defend what I believe. So if you judge me, I'm going to have to defend myself, and I don't know how to do it, so I'd rather just say don't be judgmental so you can leave me alone. And so there's a passivity in the non-judgmental thing that has arisen in a culture that is ignorant of ultimate worldview issues and is not living a very good life. And so the easy way to be able to do that is to just say, let's not judge anybody. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
See, you got to understand why Hollywood people tend to go this direction. The reason Hollywood people are constantly involved in causes like the environment and things like that is because they don't have meaning in life. Their money and their fame doesn't give them meaning. And so they have to find a cause that gives meaning to their lives but doesn't require them to have to change. So, the kind of causes they line up for allows them to get some meaning without having to change inside. And that's at the very root of being non-judgmental. The idea of hell, though, basically says you could be dead wrong about something that matters, and you'd better face up to that question. Well, people don't want to have to do that. So the non-judgmentalism is the result of not wanting to self-evaluate or reflect on myself very deeply.
Very well said. Our next question is, how has the fall of man limited or impacted our ability to think biblically? In other words, what is the effect of spiritual death on our mind?
Well, the fall makes the mind naturally want to rationalize things against God and in light of one's self-interest. And so we all have a tendency to want to take things and use our minds to justify our lifestyles. I do it, we all do it, and we need help not to do it. So the fallen nature of the mind makes us fickle and untrustworthy, but it doesn't follow from that the mind, even the fallen mind, is not capable of knowing some truth, and that it can't be reasoned with. I mean, if you look at the book of Acts, what Paul did in reasoning with unbelieving thinkers, in preaching to unbelieving thinkers, was reasoned with them. The Greek word is dialogizomai. He dialogued, argued, reasoned with them. Remember what he did for 2 full years around Ephesus? He went to a school of Tyrannus, remember that? And he was there lecturing every day for 2 solid years. He wasn't preaching, he was lecturing. So that's basically would be, the mind is fallen, but it's not erased. It's still made in the image of God and can still be used.
Well, that's good news.
I'd be out of a job if
The next question, I think, has to do with substance dualism. It says, how does an immaterial mind affect a material body?
Okay, the idea is that our souls are not physical, and the body is physical, so how can the two interact with one another? And the answer is, and I'll tell you why this is the right answer, they just do. Now, here's why that's the right answer. If I ask a how question, like how does my ignition key get my carburetors, my pistons to move? What I'm asking for is an intervening mechanism between my key and my pistons that I can describe, because this causes something to happen to that through this intervening mechanism. Does that make sense to you? So when you ask a how question, you're asking for an intervening mechanism between two things that allows one to interact with the other. When it comes to mind-brain interaction, the interaction is direct and basic. There is no intervening mechanism. When I will to raise my arm, that mental act in my soul of willing my arm to go up causes my nervous system to activate and my arm goes up. So the mind can cause things to happen to the body directly. Causation there cannot be broken down into something more basic. It's immediate. It's not mediated through some intervening mechanism. So a how question here is like asking who made God. The answer to who made God is nobody. He's unmakeable. And the answer is how does mind interact with body is that it just does. There's no mechanism that brokers the interaction. Are we feeling any love?
Why is that topic, the mind and the body and their relationship to each other, such an important idea when it comes to atheists? And how does that correspond to apologetics?
More and more people are claiming that materialism is true, that you are your brain and central nervous system. And if that follows, then the idea that there's life after death becomes more difficult to substantiate. And there are a number of other problems. There's no free will if I'm my brain. I'm completely determined by my brain chemistry. And even the church has given up animal souls. I mean, I go into churches and say animals have souls, and people go, what did he just say? And it was Darwin that said animals didn't have souls, not the Bible. The church has always taught that animals had souls. But we're out of touch with this teaching because we've been sucked in by contemporary science with regard to animals. Now, the point is then that atheists try to say that because the mind can't interact with the body, there is no mind. You're just your brain. And guess what happens when you're dead? You're dead. On that view. So you don't have to worry about an afterlife. So that's why that matters.
So then it matters for us to be able to defend why there is an actual soul independent from the body, because it helps substantiate the fact of the afterlife in heaven.
That's right. And in near-death experiences, I had a student whose grandfather was on the operating table. He died. He left his body, and his granddad was watching a young and an older doctor try to revive him. This is a true story. The young doctor did it for about 5 minutes and gave up on him. The old doctor and he said to the older doctor, let's let him go. He's had a good long life. He's gone. And the old doctor said, I can't do that. I got to keep at it for a while. Well, this granddad's watching this. He doesn't have eyeballs. He doesn't need eyes to see. He doesn't need a brain to think. He's able to think quite nicely without a brain. He's able to see without eyes. He can hear without ears. He doesn't need his body. Now, when you're in the body, that's different. I'll say something about that in a minute. But he comes back into his body, and the first thing he does is cuss out the younger doctor. Just report the facts, ladies and gentlemen. I don't make them up. That was a case that provides evidence that the soul is not the brain, because the brain was on the operating table and he was up on top of the ceiling, floating around. Now, If I were in a car and I were seat belted in the driver's seat and it was locked and the door was locked so I couldn't get out of the driver's seat, got it? Would you agree with me that my ability to move around town would depend upon whether the car worked? So, for example, if the car worked, I could get around town. If the steering wheel broke so it only turned right, I wouldn't be able to do certain things, would I? Would that prove I was the car? So when I'm in my body, if I get Alzheimer's or something goes wrong with my brain, it'll affect my ability to regather my memories. But that doesn't prove that I'm my brain. It just proves that while I'm in my brain, I need the brain to work before I can do certain things, just like when I'm in a car, I need the car to work before I can do certain things. And if I get out of the car, all bets are off. Now I know we're feeling some love.
Makes sense. If someone wanted to read more on that topic, what would be a good introduction to substance dualism?
Yeah, I don't think there is a good introductory treatment. I think in my book, Love Your God with All Your Mind, there's probably a chapter on that that's probably the best grassroots level treatment of it, I think. So love your God with all your mind.
All right, our next question is, what do you think is the most important idea that culture offers against Christianity that Christians need to equip themselves against today?
Yeah, it'd be tough to identify the first one, just one, but a couple of three. The first one is that science has shown that there doesn't need to be a God. That would be one. I think the second one is that evil in the world shows that God can't be real because if he were real, he would take care of evil. And I think the primary answer to that is that someday he will. But right now he's permitting it for his own purposes and to honor free choice. I think that would be the quick answer to the question. The third one I think really is the only way problem. That's fine if that's your way, but how can you really say that there's just one way? And I think the answer to that is that truth is pretty narrow. I use an illustration. You understand we're talking about the one-way problem now? And I was in a fraternity.
There's only one way.
One way to God, through Jesus, instead of all different religions or legitimate ways. I was in a fraternity at the fraternity house at the University of Massachusetts, sharing the gospel, and one guy raised this problem about, aren't all religions basically legitimate ways to God? And so there's not just one way to God. And I said, well, tell me what my mother looks like. And he looked at me stunned and said, I don't have any idea. And I said, well, just give it your best shot. And he said, well, okay, just go. I said, go along with me for a minute. Oh, he said, she's 5 feet tall, 100 pounds, and has blonde hair. So I said to the other guy, another guy in the fraternity house, I said, you tell me what my mom looks like. He says, 5'4", 120 pounds, brown hair. One more, 5'7", 140 pounds, gray hair. Now, I said, my mom can't be 5 feet tall, 5'4", and 5'7" all at once. She can't weigh 100 pounds, 120, 140 pounds. I used to think they couldn't have all the same color at the same time. I don't believe that one anymore. I've seen it. Okay. But, so I said, now, sir, you think my mom's 5 feet tall. You could start writing a hymn about my mom's height and weight. You could start meeting every Saturday or Sunday morning. You could recruit $1 billion and send missionaries all over the world to proclaim the idea that my mom's 5 feet tall. And if you persuaded 500 million people on the face of the earth that my mom was 5 feet tall, that wouldn't do anything, because if she's 5'4", she's 5'4", and just being sincere doesn't prove anything. Now, what was the purpose? Yeah, you don't need to clap, but the purpose of the mother illustration. I wish my students were like you. Gee, is this going to be on the test, you know? But the purpose of the mother illustration is that contradictory views about God can't all be correct, about the mother can't be correct. You understand that? She can't be 5 feet tall and 5'7". Well, Buddhism says there is no God. Hinduism says there are 330 million gods, right? Islam says the greatest sin you can commit is believing Jesus is God, and that's part of Christianity. They can't all be right. So either none of them is right or only one is. Maybe none of them are right, but I think there's evidence for Christianity, but at least they can't all be right. And sincerity doesn't prove truth. That's just the important thing. You can be sincerely wrong.
Amen.
You got to invite me back here more often, man.
Yeah, one thing I'd like to ask you, Dr. Moreland, is it could easily be conceived or perceived that, well, Dr. J.P. Moreland, he's just a really smart guy, which you are. But that's why he knows all this stuff. For the average person, we can't. But when I was reading your book, Love Your God with All Your Mind, one of the things that you talked about was understanding your downtimes, when you're not at your best, when you're at your most tired, and understand those rhythms. And you said that in that book, when we're at our downtimes, what we tend to do is we sit down and we watch TV, or we become couch potatoes. And you actually exhort in your book to go take a walk and then sit down for 30 minutes to an hour and read something that will help you love God with all your mind. And so, I mean, I guess what I'm saying is it's easy to think, well, this is just for smart people, but do you have to work at it?
Yes, but I'm not saying that I need to watch TV and have a downtime like anybody.
Sure.
But we could all spend a little bit of time, a couple of 3 evenings a week, reading for a half hour. After you watch your favorite, shows and have dinner, read for 30 minutes and then watch your television programs. I'm just suggesting a habit like that. But here's the deal. Suppose that we were deeply burdened to change the health of the American people. We wanted to help to promote a campaign that in 40 years would get the American people as healthy as they possibly could be. Obviously, there would have to be some experts about health called doctors that would be a part of the effort, right? But don't you think it would also be strategic to form small groups and communities that knew a little bit about medicine and health, that could kind of spread the word to their neighborhoods about don't eat this and do eat that? Well, that's where we come in. I've been called to be an expert on these things. That's what I do for a living. I spend all day today studying a very specific topic. And I've been doing it for 40 years. And that's my calling. If I didn't do it, I would be remiss. I've been called to be an academic. Well, you might not live in the academic community, but you could still spread the disease given your station in life and be a little bit more studious. That's all I'm saying. Can you be like me? Probably not, because you don't have the time. Now, there are many of you smarter than I am. I just have put more time in. So you don't have to compare yourself that way. This makes sense. We've got different gifts and different callings. We're different people. But would you agree that we could all get a little bit better at this? So you can listen to CDs, listen to tapes, maybe read a little bit more. That's all I'm saying.
We had another question come in. How can the doctrine of the Trinity be considered logical?
Oh, that's very simple. A logical contradiction would be to say that there are 3 gods and 1 God, or 3 persons and 1 person. That's a contradiction. But the Trinity says that there are 3 persons within 1 substance. That's clearly not a contradiction. Because in order for there to be a contradiction, you have to see there are 3 P's and 1 P. But this says there are 3 P's and 1 Q. That is 3 persons within 1 God, and in Jesus Christ, there's 1 person and 2 natures. So now you can say this is a mystery, and this has been formulated in much more detail by Christian scholars. There's a certain mystery to it, though it can be understood to some degree. It's capable of being grasped by those who've studied it. But the idea that it's a logical contradiction is just kind of nonsense. It's a freshman mistake in logic. I don't mean to be demeaning, but no adult who's been to college should ever think that. Because in order for it to be a contradiction, you have to say there are 3 gods and 1 God. Or there are 3 persons and 1 person. That's a contradiction. But 3 persons within 1 substance or 1 being, and with Christ, 1 person with 2 natures, there's no contradiction there.
So there.
I mean, it's just very simple. It's not complicated. Developing a detailed doctrine of the Trinity is complicated, but understanding it's not a contradiction is very simple.
This is a very good question. The person asks, do you think Christian higher education will be able to exist in its present form in 25 years? Does it seem that it'll become illegal to teach historic Christian worldviews?
Wow, that's tough. I don't have an answer to that. You know, the way things are going in Washington, D.C., and in the political landscape and the political correctness, I have concerns about whether Christian pastors will be able to say what they believe in public, and even in their pulpits, to be honest with you. But I don't have an insight on that, but I do get concerned about it. Yeah.
Something we should be praying for and understand that if we are persecuted for that,
And
the church will grow.
Vote.
Yes. I have one last question. I had mentioned to you when I read the introduction to the book Philosophical Foundations for a Christian Worldview, you and Dr. Craig had mentioned that philosophy is the handmaiden to theology. And could you explain to the audience what you mean by that?
I got saved in the 60s in the Jesus movement. I was in a fraternity at the University of Missouri, and I was a chemistry major. And some guys came by my fraternity house with Campus Crusade for Christ and made a case for the reliability of the Gospels. I'd never heard of any such thing. I didn't know there was evidence for Christianity. I began to look into it, and then 6 weeks later, I became a Christian. Well, I started witnessing like crazy, and I got my butt kicked regularly. I mean, I was out there sharing my faith, and I didn't know what I was talking about. 2/3 of the things I was saying were heresy, I'm sure. I was all over the stinking map. I love Jesus. I was on fire for him. I still am, but I just was out there. But I got asked questions, and I led some guys to the Lord and was discipling them, and they were raising questions, and I didn't know how to answer them. Well, guess what I found out? There was this field that all the questions ultimately came back to, and it was philosophy, and I thought that was psychology misspelled. I didn't even know what it was. Because we don't teach philosophy in elementary and in junior high and in high school any longer. You understand that? So kids go to college and they major in business or nursing and they don't even know what philosophy is. I didn't know what it was. I was a chemistry major. Well, it turned out it was the most important field there is in terms of being a servant to the Christian religion, next to theology. And it's, stuff is rich. It's just very interesting stuff.
So then the more we know about philosophy, that will actually help us think correctly when we enter into theology?
Yes.
Okay. So that'd be good to know.
It would be good to know.
All right. Well, that was our final question. Dr. Moreland, again,
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.